My name's VaughanWilliams. This is my MS GISD kind of capstone presentation. As a plant nerd, I decided to focus on rare plant conservation. So this project is really, it's a GIS-based approach to assessing suitable habitat within the California State Parks Santa Cruz District. So just to start this all off, I'm going to give an intro to rare species conservation and specifically rare plant conservation. So at least in California, the kind of rare plant just species and native species conservation all starts with the California Native Plants Society. And this is an organization that has the mission to save native plants through science, education, outreach, education, and conservation. This organization's created something called the California Rare Plant Ranking System, which is a system to kind of designate and explain kind of rarity of species. There's two parts to this system. The prefix, which is designated by either 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, 3, or 4. The 1 designation kind of determines that this is a species that's only found in California. The A and the B, the A stands for a species that is potentially extirpated, doesn't exist in the wild anymore in California, whereas the B is a species that's rare, threatened, or endangered. That 2 designation stands for a species that is potentially common elsewhere, so in other states besides California. So not as, maybe is a rare species in California, not in other states. The 3 stands for a species that needs more study, and 4 is a species with limited distribution. Each of these ranks has a suffix, so it's appended by a 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, and this really talks about like how threatened is the species. So 0.1 is a species that's seriously threatened, 0.2 is a species that's moderately threatened, and then 0.3 not very threatened. Species rarity, it's comes about because of a variety of factors potentially. One of them could be habitat loss. This species exists in a place that's being actively disturbed. Could be there's a new mining development that's going on in its habitat, and so it's just losing habitat. It could be that there's a new species that could be from other countries. So a lot of our grasslands in California are being invaded by annual exotic species. So they're being kind of encroached upon. Climate change is becoming more and more of a factor. Temperature changes over time, changes in weather patterns, precipitation regimes are shifting. So that can be a contributor as well. And then strangely enough, species rarity oftentimes and sometimes has its result just because there's a lack of survey data. These are species that sometimes are hard to find. They're cryptic. They don't bloom or get propagated every year in the wild, and so they're just harder to find. Conservation efforts, really a lot of this work begins with active restoration work. So can we put the effort into actually maybe clear out exotics or actually do some outplanting in the wild of these species? That a lot of times that restoration work is going to have to begin with doing really intensive surveys and finding like where are these species in the wild, where have they been seen, and just like where is suitable habitat. So the survey area or study area for this project was the California State Parks Santa Cruz District, which is composed of 44 parks between 2 counties, San Mateo and Santa Cruz County. So the northern part of the study area is San Mateo County, southern part is Santa Cruz County. This is in Central California. The state parks in this district encompass about 73,000 acres, so a pretty large area of land, and encompass a diverse suite of habitat types. So anywhere from the coast, where we're seeing like coastal prairie and coastal scrub as the dominant ecotype. And as we kind of move up in elevation, you start getting into oak woodlands as you move into these up and through these marine terraces, redwood forest. Finally, kind of near the top of the mountains up there is chaparral, and then sprinkled all within this is seasonal wetlands, riparian corridors, and lots of elevational gradients. For this project, species of interest was an interesting thing to go through. I was able to identify at least 90 rare plant species within the study area. They ranged from trees and scrub to small annual plants. But I really wanted to try and hone in, like, what are some of the priority species for state parks? So I was able to chat with state parks employees and some of their conservation folks, figure out, okay, what might be some habitat types that need to be evaluated, and what might the species be there. Also was able to chat with local conservation groups and conservationists who have done a lot of work in the field. Some of the things I was looking for species for this project were annual versus perennial. A lot of the grasslands in this area have a lot of annual wildflowers that are becoming rarer and rarer. And goes along with that kind of cryptic species. What are species that are harder to find in the wild? So in the end, 5 species were selected for the project, and I, um, yeah, explain those here. So Collinsia multicolor was one of the first ones. Really pretty wildflowers. It's called the San Francisco Collinsia. It's an annual species, so it comes up once a year and reseeds itself in the Platyrtanaceae family. It has that California native plant rank of 1B.2, so it's rare, threatened, and endangered in California and elsewhere, and it's moderately threatened. Habitat characteristics, it really likes these wet, moist kind of seeps that are under coastal live oak understory, slopes between like very, very kind of flat zones, 0 to 10, elevations below 300 meters. So not high up in the hills, but down below. This species only has 18 historical records in the study site, and was actually one of our more commonly recorded species. Microceras pallidosa, marsh microceras. It's a perennial in the sunflower family, has that same California native plant rank, and also prefers some of these wetland areas. But conversely, really likes or seems to like grasslands, open woodlands, very flat areas, which kind of goes along with the fact that it grows in wetlands in areas all below 300 meters. So characterized in terms of soils, moist clay soils, seasonally saturated. Really likes those, yeah, those kind of grassland areas. So this species only has 5 records historically in the study site. Back to that just being a rare plant. Plagiobothries diffusus, San Francisco popcorn flower. It's also an annual. It's in a different family. VaughanWilliams has that same native plant rank as the other 2. Again, really likes these moist areas that kept popping up in this project. Very flat zones, below 300 meters, moist, sandy, loamy soils, and there were 14 records. Stibinzoceras decipiens, Santa Cruz microceras, so similar to that Microceras pallidosa. It's a perennial in the sunflower family as well, same native plant rank. Habitat characteristics, conversely to the other one, which is more of a wetland or wetter species, this one prefers open, sandy, shaly, rocky soils within this coast live oak understory in steeper terrain, so 5 to 30%, and up higher in elevation, so elevations between 10 and 500 meters. There were 11 records of this species. Last but not least, Trifolium polyodon, Pacific Grove clover. It's a perennial. It's in the pea family, and was actually not necessarily rarer, but the habitat was more seriously threatened for this species than some of the others. So it has that California native plant rank of 1B1. Stream adjacent, but has a tendency to inhabit closed cone pine forest, moist meadows, low areas with low slope, back to that 0 to 300 meter elevation, but in well-drained and sandy or loamy soils. This species only had been seen in the wild. There was 3 records of it in the study site, which definitely made it a little bit difficult to validate some of the models that I created. We'll go back to that later. So the essence of this project is in habitat suitability modeling. And suitability models are really just predictors of where a species might exist on a landscape. And this really comes down to, can you apply a species' unique habitat requirements and needs to an entire landscape using a GIS approach? So this model uses what's called it's a weighted model, and that basically is some sort of additive approach. So each different character gets given a ranking from 1 to 10, so low to high. And the result is a model that predicts high to low suitability. So the areas in red in this map here are areas of low suitability. Your odds of finding this species according to the model would be very, very low in those red areas, versus the green areas are areas with high probability of finding that species. It's an area with with suitable habitat. Limitations for using this type of model is there's lots of covariates that are involved in creating these models. And as it is a weighted approach, basically, you end up with a number at the end, and there's going to be different ways to calculate that number. And so you don't exactly know what are the most important factors that are contributing towards suitable habitat. And so you end up with just this general number at the end. These models, as with any models, they may not be exhaustive. So you're using kind of your best bet at figuring out what are contributing towards suitable habitat, but there may be others. And then, especially with rare plant modeling, these models they're based on expert opinion or current records. And for rare plants, that can be difficult. There's not always experts on some of these rare plants, and a lot of times there aren't that many records. So being able to validate them can be difficult. The data I used for this project were calculated. Some of them were calculated from a digital elevation model raster, so that I was able to extrapolate elevation, slope, and aspect. I sourced a fine scale vegetation data map, so that was able to, across the entire study area, I was able to determine what are the different kind of ecotypes that are in each area, and that was pretty awesome, that fine scale data. Geologic data, found that through USGS, and that was contributed to soil type, underlying rock type, and then finally drainage class as well. So the workflow for this project, first off, I identified like what are the habitat requirements for each of these species? What things am I going to use? And so that's where I got those rasters, the elevation, slope, aspect, vegetation, all that kind of stuff. Sourced those data sets, converted them all so they were in some sort of uniform form in the same spatial scale. Added all those rasters into a suitability modeler in ArcGIS Pro. They were then ranked by suitability, which took quite some time. After that was finished, I was able to actually weight those rasters against each other, so give some of them maybe more importance than others. Then was able, like, basically that's the model. That model was created. At the end of that, I was able to validate the model using survey data, export the model into a raster again, make pretty maps, and then finally mask the raster to the desired area, summarize it for state parks. So the results from this, Calintia multicolor, it was determined to be, in the map here on the right kind of shows you green areas are prime suitability, red areas are low, but really liked coastal prairie or predicted coastal prairie, and seemed to, the model was predicting ridgelines and valley bottoms were high probability for suitability. And this was interesting because it seemed to have very few suitable locations. Microceres pallidosa, a lot more red in this one, actually, which is kind of interesting. Again, coastal prairie, which I kind of knew, predicted more low elevations. This would be, the species would have suitable habitat adjacent to the coast. And then something that was kind of cool about this species in this season was there were some occurrences and records that were like determined this year in sites that were the model determined suitable. So it worked, I guess we could say. Pelagiobrothus diffusus, San Francisco popcorn flower, another coastal prairie species. As opposed to some of the others that are like right adjacent to the coast, this one seemed to have more suitable habitat in kind of the second marine terraces, so up a little higher from the coastline, and had a lot of that green is showing up in the central southern portion of the study area, so more in Santa Cruz County than in San Mateo County. Stemizoceras decipiens, the Microceres, that's another coastal prairie species. Ridgelines, valley bottoms, similar to what I saw with some of the others. This model, kind of unfortunately, seemed to be how best I could describe it as kind of noisier. And you can kind of see that in that there's kind of green suitable habitat sprinkled everywhere. So this would be something, this model, hoping would need a little bit more refinement. And there may be a covariate that I wasn't able to use that would be more applicable for this project. And then trifolium polydon, it's not, I determined that it wasn't really, in terms of the model, not coastally associated, like these mid to lower elevations of large valleys. And then again, this was a hard one because I had the fewest species observations, so difficult to validate this one. Conclusions from this project, kind of neat to see that there was green in all these areas. So there is suitable habitat for these species, and it still exists. And that gives me a lot of hope for restoration work and conservation work for all these species. Climate covariates, I think, are things that should be used in future models. That's going to become more and more important as the climate and the world changes. And then just a note, rare species modeling is difficult. There's, I think it needs probably constant updating and constant validation as new species or new populations are found. And then last but not least, the role of fire should be something that's considered in future models for some of these species. The kind of a significant portion of state parks in this region burned in 2020. And the data that I used for this project was kind of surveyed before 2020. So bringing that into part of this model would be pretty important. And that's it. Thanks to all of you for coming and listening to me.